Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 4 of Safeguarding Adults Week. I hope you've been able to join a few sessions before today. And as you know, we've got some webinars. We've got a webinar this afternoon, and we've got 2 more webinars tomorrow. So if you haven't managed to join them for the rest of the week, please do. All of the details are on our website, on the Safeguarding Adults Board website. My name's Marcia Campbell, and I work for the Safeguarding Adults Board for the West of Berkshire. It's nice to see some names that I recognise in the attendees list as well. That's a really nice sign. This morning we have got Daphne Franks with us, and Daphne Franks is an advocate against predatory marriage. Daphne is going to tell us a bit about her experience with predatory marriage and what she's done to advocate against it. And I'm sure that you'll all find it just really interesting. And we'd love to get your feedback at the end of the session as well. I'm just going to do some very quick housekeeping. So we are recording this session. So we're going to keep cameras off and microphones off. If you have any questions, please can you use the Q&A or the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. We're going to have time at the end for questions. But Daphne, I'm sure you'll let me know if there's any opportunity during the session if you want to take people's questions, but it might be neater at the end.
It's
Yeah,
neater at the end just because sometimes I cover things later on in the presentation that people want to ask about. But I just want to make it very clear I'm happy to take any questions about any aspect of it. If I don't know the answer, I'll say, but I've got a very good lay knowledge of this now because I've been campaigning for nearly 10 years. So please ask any question you wish, and don't think my question's too simplistic because this is not a well-known topic. So thank you.
perfect. Thank you for clearing that up as well. So before we start, I'm going to put a poll in the chat. Those of you who have been here before know that I'm going to be asking what your confidence level is in terms of the subject matter before we start. And I'll put one up at the end before you leave, which is going to be asking you the same question. Um, so you can see, Daphne, that already that people are saying that they're either, well, it's changing all the time actually, but somewhat not confident is the current main response. So hopefully we'll see by the end of the session how people feel.
I hope we'll be
So
more confident. Yeah,
I
thank
hope
you.
so too. I hope so too. So I will now hand over formally to Daphne Franks. Thank you very much. Daphne, over to you.
Thank you, Marcia, and thank you everybody for coming. My name's Daphne Franks. I'm a teacher by background. I used to teach in schools years ago, English and drama, but for about 30 years I taught at Leeds Medical School. I'm not clinically trained at all, but I taught all the non-clinical stuff apart from ethics. So I taught communication in particular, patient safety, teamwork, leadership, things like that, and a bit of safeguarding. But it wasn't enough to stop what happened to my mum back in 2015, 2016. And I've been, people have said I should say at the beginning, this is quite an upsetting story, but so if you are working with or dealing with elderly relatives with dementia, you may find it quite difficult to hear. So I want you to please take on board things are improving. It's slow, but they are. I'm just going to share my screen now. Marcia, if you can let me know when you can
Yes,
see my screen. Okay,
it's
great.
all there.
I'll
Yeah.
make a start. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes and then I'm happy to take any questions. My mother, Joan Blass, who was a widow, died at home on March the 26th, 2016. She was nearly 92 with advanced vascular dementia and terminal cancer. The day she died was Easter Saturday. Everything went quiet over the Easter weekend. And then when everything opened up again on Easter Tuesday, we got a phone call from my mother's doctor, her GP. He sounded worried. He said, Daphne, did you know your mother was married? and that was when the bottom dropped out of our world. So this is a story of predatory marriage, which is a term we have borrowed from Canada, and it's beginning to be widely used in the UK. It's generally defined as when a younger person marries a much older person purely for the purpose of gaining access to their estate on their death. However, having done nearly 10 years' work on this, I'd like to broaden that definition to marrying someone who is older, vulnerable, lacks capacity to consent, marrying them for your own purposes, whatever they may be, because I've found a lot of overlap with grooming, gaslighting, and especially coercive control. Don't get me wrong, they always keep the money. The police tend to think it's all about the money, and they always keep the money. But I am convinced that's not what it's all about. And I saw that in the introduction, I think that Marsha sent out, it mentioned the Sixth Commandment, which is a television program, drama made about a real life case of church warden Ben Field, who managed to have marry an older man and then have an affair with an older woman at the same time. And he only ever made about 20 grand out of it. But he poisoned them both. And he's now in prison. That's the very extreme end of the story. But as you'll hear, there are a lot of correlations with our story. So my mother died on the Easter Saturday, the 26th of March, 2016. On Easter Tuesday, 29th of March, the man arrived at Mum's GP surgery with a marriage certificate. And that's how we found out about the secret marriage. I call him the man. I won't name him because for me, it's not about him. It's about my mum and all the other old ladies and old men to whom this has happened. The other point I want to make is he hasn't been prosecuted, so it doesn't seem fair for me to go around naming him, even though the police did try very hard to prosecute him. He had married her in secret on the 26th of October 2015. At the time, he was 67 and my mother was nearly 92, with a 5-year history of diagnosed worsening vascular dementia. And I know that there are many happy marriages with big age gaps. That wasn't what concerned me, really. It was the fact that both parties have to be able to agree to the marriage and neither party should have been coerced. The witnesses to the wedding were his son and a lady from the pub. None of my mother's family or friends was present, and none of us knew it was happening. We set about trying to find out how the marriage could possibly have taken place. We just couldn't believe it. First of all, I had registered enduring power of attorney, and in the early days of the campaign, I had lots of very educated people almost shouting at me, but you must have known, you had power of attorney. No, for reasons which I will explain to you in a little while, I didn't know. And the other big thing is we lived next door to her. We lived closer than next door, really. We had bought the old family home in a Leeds suburb from my parents in 1999, and they had a house built in the garden. And that's where they lived. So she was 30 yards away, across a lawn and across a drive. That's all where she was. She couldn't have been nearer. For many years, it was like one family spread across 2 houses. We just went in and out of each other's houses. We didn't lock the doors during the day. And when my father was alive, I would hear this hammering and banging coming from the cellar of our house because he was always building things down there. So we were very, very close. So we just couldn't believe it. I have had other cases sobbing down the phone to me saying, I couldn't do anything because I lived 300 miles away. And I was I lived 30 yards away. I saw my mum every day and all the time. At the time my husband was working from home, I was partly working from home. We saw her several times a day. So we started, as I said, to try to find out how the marriage could possibly have taken place. Here are my parents, Ron and Joan Blass, in happier times enjoying a pub lunch. My father was born in the slums of Leeds. He came from a very, very poor background. He worked very hard all his life. He became a pharmacist, and that's what he did. He met my mum during his 1 year at university, at Leeds University, as part of his training. My mother was from a very poor background in Barrow-in-Furness. Many people don't know where Barrow is. If you go to the bottom of the Lake District and then go west for further than you believe possible, you get to Barrow-in-Furness. It's a little old Victorian shipbuilding town, lots and lots of rows of red brick houses, very working class. Nobody from Mum's family had ever been to university, but she first of all passed the 11 plus and got to Barrow Grammar School, and then she was very academic at school, and there was one scholarship going to university, and my mum got it, and that was to Leeds University. Also, when she was a teenager, she was very, very sporty and athletic, and she was so good at swimming. She was being trained for the Olympics in Barrow-in-Furness swimming pool. But sadly, it was wartime, and the Nazis put a stop to that ambition by the simple method of dropping a bomb on the pool. But Mum carried on swimming her whole life, and she swam in the sea till she was 90. At Leeds University, she did very well. She edited the Griffin student newspaper, which is still going today, and she was also captain of Leeds University hockey team. When she graduated, she went to London and worked as a journalist for a couple of years on an old newspaper called the News Chronicle. And then she came back to Leeds and married my father. And basically, they lived happily ever after. They had 2 children, me born in 1956, and then sadly, after a series of miscarriages, my brother born in 1965. He lives in Amsterdam, so I don't see him that often, though he's coming over at New Year with his wife. He has a wife and a family over there. He's lived in Amsterdam for many years, but we're very, very close, and we speak on the phone at least a couple of times a week. So that's our family. When my mum was 68, she had a massive stroke. She was collapsed on the floor, unable to move, unable to speak. She was taken to hospital, and I remember a young doctor bending over her saying to me, "Can she normally look after herself?" And I was she was cycling in Amsterdam last week. She's fitter than any of us. And perhaps because of that fitness, she made a terrific recovery. And in the end, the only thing that outwardly remained of the stroke was she muddled up he and she ever after. She would try to say, "If you want your dad, he's in the garden." And she'd think really hard. And then she'd say, "If you want your mum, she's in the garden." And then she'd look very puzzled. But she had been a smoker, as many people of her generation were. She gave up when she was pregnant with me, actually. And smoking, as you may know, can be a predictor for vascular dementia and can be a predictor for strokes, and strokes can be a predictor for vascular dementia. So not definite, but that is possibly why that happened. But as I said, she made a terrific recovery, and here she is in her 80s on Caldy Island near Tenby in South Wales, one of our favourite holiday places. And at the age of 80, she could walk 5 miles without even thinking about it. And here she is, age 89, diving into a swimming pool again in Tenby. At that time, she had quite bad dementia. The muscle memory meant that she could swim, she could dive, she did a beautiful, neat dive into the pool. But what she couldn't do was pull herself out of the pool again. She couldn't work out that she couldn't get out of the pool. She couldn't project into the future. So we had to keep a very close eye on her. And her favourite stroke was backstroke, and she'd start swimming backstroke merrily down the pool and forget that she was in the pool, not in the sea, and she was about to crash into the end. And there's several videos of me going, "Mum, stop!" and running after her to try and stop her. But she was having a great time in the moment. And to me, that is what matters with dementia, having a good time in the moment. The past is very woolly, the future's unpredictable. But if you're having a good time in the moment, that's the best it can be. And here is Mum on one of her favourite beaches in Cumbria, and she's making a sandcastle. I'll come back to that sandcastle later on in the talk, but you can see how flexible she is, how bendy she is. She was late 80s then. Her hair didn't go grey until the last couple of years of her life. And I think this is one of the things that helped to fool the registrars at the wedding. It was a civil wedding. Mum looked much younger than she was. The man had grown before the wedding a long grey beard down to his waist. And I thought, it doesn't do him any favours. It makes him look a lot older. Why is he doing that? After the wedding, some time after, I clocked it made them look about the same age. Though, of course, the registrars had their dates of birth written down. But as I will elaborate, registrars at the time had no training in assessing mental capacity and no training in safeguarding, so they cannot be blamed. This is by the garden gate where in November 2011 my mum met the man. She'd been formally diagnosed with vascular dementia earlier that year. I don't have time to go into it all now, but the diagnosis runs all through her medical records, mentioned repeatedly, and I have a copy of those records. He seems to have met her by the garden gate where she is there. That drive comes in at sort of in between the two houses, and she was always out there gardening. She loved gardening. So he seems to have met her by the garden gate. She seems to have invited him in for a cup of tea. And that, again, is not, she wouldn't have done that before the dementia. The brakes were off a bit. She'd lost her inhibition. She would have been a lot more cautious. And he seems to have moved in really quickly. And we were really worried. The first we saw of him were his things were all over the house, lots of jackets and some quite valuable things like an iPad. And Mum didn't seem to know who he was. She kept asking me, "Who is he? Where does he come from?" And then, most chilling of all afterwards, "Did you get him for me?" That broke my heart. I think she thought he was some sort of carer. And indeed, he told everybody that he was her carer. And as soon as he said, "I'm her carer," nobody asked another question. And that is one of my big takeaway messages to everyone. Ask one more question than you're comfortable with. And even when he used her debit card in the supermarket without her being there, and was challenged, "That's not your card. Whose card is that?" He said, "Oh, she's an old lady and I'm her carer." And they just went, "Oh, that's fine then." Not, "You are committing fraud," which is what they should have thought. He just is very good at deflection and manipulation. So he moved into a house within a few weeks. He was then 62 and Mum was 87. We were really worried. My brother came over from Amsterdam quite a bit at that time because we were so worried. And on one occasion, he actually asked the man straight out, "Where do you live?" Because the man won't answer any questions. He just will not. He swerves every question. But finally, by asking straight out, my brother managed to get his address. And it was about a quarter of a mile away from Mum's house. And my brother went round to the house and came back absolutely shocked. The house was really dilapidated, clapped out cars in the drive, greying curtains at the windows, and no furniture. And now he was living with my mum. So we were really worried and we went to the police. Unfortunately, we hit on a couple of young policemen, and I know now they won't have been trained in safeguarding. And they said, "Well, we can't do anything. What do you want us to do? He's there at your mother's invitation." And I said, "He's not. She doesn't know he's there. She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know his name. She never knew his name. He's got quite an unusual name and she never knew it. If anything, she called him Laddo, which was her term for some bloke who's about. If there was an engineer around, she'd go, "Laddo's mending the television." So yeah, she called him Laddo. And so we thought, well, if the police can't do anything, we'll just keep an eye on her. We were very naive in those days, I think. And I just thought, well, I'll keep an eye on her and see what's going on. And I used to check her fridge and I used to check her for bruises, and I didn't know what else I could do. Um, and then Mum got cancer, and that distracted us all for a bit. She had a course of chemotherapy. She had cancer of the peritoneum, which is a bit like ovarian cancer. And she had a course of chemotherapy and made a very good initial recovery. Of course, the cancer came back later on, but initially she made a great recovery. And then it was her 90th birthday, and we decided to have a party. That's a much younger, less battered looking version of me um, standing next to Mum. We hired a hall in Leeds and we invited basically everyone Mum knew, and that was about 70 people. They came from all over the country. And it was a huge success. We had swing dancers. My brother organised all that. The room was decorated. On the walls were lots of posters saying Joan's 90th birthday. We had a lot of cakes with 90 on them. Mum was asked at the party, "How old are you, Joan?" And she said, "Oh, am I 70?" And when told she was 90, she just couldn't believe it and fell about. Anyone who knew her could see that in that picture, she didn't really know what was going on. Her eyes are a bit blank, but her smile says it all. She was having a lovely time. And for me, having a lovely time with dementia in the moment is what matters. She danced all afternoon and had a great time. Um, so But there was a red flag going on, and that was the man. The man didn't want us to have the party. He was looking round the room saying, "There might be cameras in the ceiling." And we were kind of, "So what if there are?" But he was very worried about it. He told both photographers not to take any photos of him, which they both ignored, though I never share them, but he was most definitely there. And there was another red flag, which was really worrying us at the time, and that was the state of the house. Downstairs looked absolutely fine. And that's as far as I ever went because the man didn't want us to go upstairs. And I thought, what is going on up there? Um, it's hard for me to know now how he stopped us, but if you think about it, effectively, by now, he had my mum hostage, and I didn't want to upset him. So he would stand at the bottom of the stairs and just say, "No, you don't need to go up there. Everything's fine." And I didn't know what to do about it until one day we took Mum out for the day. My brother was over from Amsterdam, and me and my husband and my brother all went off to the Yorkshire Dales for the day. But it started to rain. So we came back rather sooner than we expected. And the man wasn't there. And as all the other cases will tell you, it's incredibly hard to get the predator away from the victim. And by the way, most predators, it's not just men who do this. In fact, early research shows it's probably mostly women. So it's male and female. Either way, it's really hard to get the predator away from the victim. But we got back to the house and he wasn't there. And we had a key, of course. So in we went. After that, he started keeping the door locked from the inside and the key in the lock, so we couldn't get in. But my brother rushed upstairs with his phone with the camera on it and came downstairs looking absolutely shocked. This was my mum's bedroom, which had been a neat, tidy little old lady bedroom, all full of pictures and ornaments, and now it looked like this. And we were horrified. He'd moved Mum out of that bedroom into a smaller bedroom, which was still full of jackets. The man is a hoarder, and he bought jackets off the internet at the rate of about 3 a week. He probably still does. So the whole of the top floor was covered in jackets, jackets hanging from the door frames, jackets in the smaller room where Mum was. There were still jackets. So it really worried us. So we thought, we need some help with this. So before Mum's death, we went to Mum's GP, and it was clear they didn't know what to do. They had me on one hand saying, "I'm really worried about this." They had the man being terribly plausible and pretending to be being very caring, pretending to be very caring, I would say. And I said to them, "Can you put your heads together and have a meeting of the whole practice and decide what can be done?" And they did, but what they came up with was, "Well, you should call social services." And by the way, I meant to say this at the beginning, I don't blame any individual or any group for what happened here with any of the groups of people that we went to, because it's not caused by bad people generally, it's caused by all the laws and procedures not keeping up with the big rise in dementia. So we did ring social services, and they were very helpful. They listened very carefully and they said, we'll send someone round. And they did. I had said, can you liaise with me? Because I'd really like you to see upstairs. But they didn't, or they couldn't, or maybe they thought that they should see mum on her own. I don't know what they thought. But the first I knew of the visit was they rang me afterwards and they said, no, no, there's nothing to worry about. There's no safeguarding concerns. Your mother's clean. She's well fed, all of that, which she was. But they hadn't been upstairs. I don't even know if he'd let them in the house. I never found out. I was just felt absolutely crushed by this. No, don't be silly, dear. There's nothing to worry about. It felt like that was the attitude, and it felt like that was the attitude all the way. Finally, one evening, we went over to see mum, my husband and me. By now, we were still seeing her several times a day. My husband was working from home, and I would take him over as a chaperone because by now I was frightened of of the man. My niece had found a piece of paper on which the man had written, "What shall I do about the sister?" question mark. And of course, that sister was me, and it really worried me. But nobody kind of took that threat to me seriously. Um, so we went over to see mum one evening, and as we were leaving, we heard mum say to the man, "Did I say what you wanted me to say?" And I thought, that's ridiculous. That is grooming. We've got to go back to the police. So we went to the police, and this time, unfortunately, we rang up, booked an appointment, hit on a very elderly policeman. He's probably a lot younger than I am now, but he seemed elderly. We asked if it could be investigated under Clare's law for domestic abuse, and he more or less laughed in my face. And he wrote everything down. And the more I said, the worse it got. So I was saying things like, we went away on holiday for a few days and we took mum with us. And when we got back, he'd painted our back door blue. Why? He painted our shed in the garden. When he had sold his house in 2014, he didn't tell us he was selling his house, but he'd put the entire contents of his house in our garage, not mum's garage, our garage. He built a shed in the garden and he said it was for mum, but she never went in it as far as I know, and he always kept it padlocked. So what was in there? Um, so I said all these things, and I could see the policeman just thinking, this woman's making it all up. She's mad. And he wrote it all down. And then at the end, he looked up at me and he said, well, people will say you just don't like him. And I thought, that's what you think. Here I am, the greedy, grasping daughter, worried about the inheritance. That's what he's thinking. And indeed it was. We never heard any more from the police. Finally, we went to the family solicitor. I said, any chance that mum could make a new will? And the solicitor said, oh, no, no, because if somebody's trying to make a new will with a solicitor and the solicitor cannot assess their capacity or are struggling in any way, they have a golden rule, which is that they must involve a medical professional. And that is indeed the case. And I said, she's no way she'll be able to make a will anyway. This solicitor had met my mum both before she had dementia and afterwards, so she could see the huge difference. This time, my mum couldn't name her children. It was that bad. So she said, no, she won't be able to make a new will. So very casually, I said, do you marry her? And I knew that the capacity bar for marriage, and this is a very key point, is much lower than that needed to make a will. But what it actually is, nobody has ever established, except it's lower than making it's needed to make a will. But the solicitor was very reassuring. He said, oh no, she said, oh no, no, she won't be able to marry because they'll have something in place at the register office because of her dementia. And unfortunately, she was doing there what I've told medical students not to do for years. She was giving false reassurance. She was making assumptions. She assumed there must be something in place, but there wasn't, sadly. So problems we found after my mother's death, and this is an absolute key point, if you take nothing away from this talk, if you didn't know this before, please take this away. In England and Wales, though not in Scotland, marriage revokes a will as though it had never existed. So if you made a will today and then you got married tomorrow, unless it was a very special will, carefully labelled, this is a will in contemplation of marriage, unless you did that, your will would be gone and your new spouse would inherit a huge amount of your estate. So my mother had made a will in 2004, leaving everything to her children. That would be me in Leeds and my brother Michael in Amsterdam. And now every professional we spoke to said, oh, well, you see, your mum died without intestate, without a will. And that was really distressing because she'd gone to a lot of trouble to make a will and it was swept away from her by the secret marriage. This secret marriage now gave the man complete control of my mother's funeral. And that meant he could organise it how he wanted. He could have her buried. He could have her cremated. He could do what he liked with her body. He didn't have to invite us. He didn't have to tell us when it was. So he didn't. And it meant we couldn't go to Mum's funeral. And I don't think I'll ever get over that. And it meant that he inherited the first 270,000 of her estate, which was all of it in her case. And that amount, by the way, has now gone up to 322,000. If that happened now, it'd be the first 322,000 of the estate. The rest would have been split between the children, but there was no rest. That was the lot. Possibly the worst thing about from the funeral was that he now owned all her possessions. Everything in the house now belonged to him. The police kept saying, no, don't go into the house. We're going to prosecute him. And it'll look bad for you if you go into the house. All our friends and relatives would say, you go in the house and get your things. And we even had to explain to the police the reason we can't go into the house and get our things is not because you're going to prosecute him. It's because the man has inherited them. They're not our things anymore. They all belong to him. And there was nothing valuable in that house. But there were things that had such sentimental value. My wedding dress, my granddad's letters from the First World War. I don't think he wanted any of this. I'm sure he just chucked it all into a skip. But he didn't want us to have it because this is all about control. The police were trying to prosecute for forced marriage. Most people, including me, thought forced marriage was a crime with young ladies with brown skin from overseas being made to marry. But if you Google forced marriage, you will find that if somebody lacks capacity to marry and the person marrying them knows that, that is forced marriage. It is a criminal offence punishable by up to 7 years in prison. And that's what the police were trying to prosecute for. But there have been no prosecutions for reasons which I will explain. All the other cases said to me, the law protects the predator. Once you're married, the law protects the predator. And indeed it does. And believe me, I'm not against marriage. I've been very happily married for 45 years. So I'm really not against marriage. In 2004, my mother had set up enduring power of attorney so I could look after her affairs if she lost mental capacity to do so. To many people's surprise, power of attorney has no link with marriage. So there is no requirement, there's no database, there's no method to tell the attorney, in other words, me, is the donor, my mother, plans to marry. So there was no way I would be told. And this applies to the newer lasting power of attorney too. The older enduring power of attorney, as you may know, is in two categories, money and property. And the newer one is in two sections, money and property and health and welfare. Well, I would argue that money, property, health and welfare all have a lot to do with marriage, but there is no link. The attorney would not be told. The lack of safeguarding at marriage was horrendous. There were no robust procedures at marriage, no standard list of questions. The more insightful registrars, the more experienced ones, will go off piste, as one of them described it, and start asking more questions if they're not sure. But they're not trained to do it. Registrars are not highly paid. They're not trained in mental capacity or in safeguarding. And yet they're expected to assess capacity to marry at every wedding they do by a technique best described as guesswork. And that is appalling. They do have some training in forced marriage as it applies to young ladies with brown skin from abroad. And they do have some training with regard to sham marriage, but forced marriage with dementia, not there at all at that time. Separate interviews. They're supposed to interview the couple separately at the notification of marriage several weeks before the wedding, and then again on the day of the ceremony. But they don't always do it, partly because of lack of basic safeguarding training. And just one registrar said to me, well, we don't do that because it's not mandatory. It says in the registrar's handbook, you should. It needs to say, you must. I have spoken to probably hundreds of registrars now, and most of them are really aware of the fact that they've been dumped on with from a great height, because years ago there just wasn't much dementia. People didn't live long enough to get dementia, but now there's so much of it that their procedures have not caught up. Misunderstanding of the Mental Capacity Act. They were aware it existed, but they hadn't been trained in it. So they just took it to mean you should accept that they're fit to marry no matter what they say or do. And that is not the case. Lack of knowledge about dementia from everyone, absolutely everyone, right unto the furthest reaches of the Crown Prosecution Service. They just didn't know. And no accountability if procedures are not followed. They all agreed afterwards my mother's wedding should have been stopped, but there was no accountability. I'm not saying that, when I say they agreed, not the registrars on the day, the General Register Office agreed, but there's no no accountability. I don't want the registrars on the day to be blamed because it was not their fault. But I would like this to be some accountability to the General Register Office. We set up a website and then we started hearing from other cases. And when we've heard from quite a few, we went to our MP, Fabian Hamilton, who's still the MP for Leeds North East. And he listened very carefully to the whole story and he said, that's ridiculous. I'm going to raise it in Parliament. And he did, in a private member's bill. It was passed unanimously for a second reading. It was the one thing that united the House in the time of Brexit. As far as I know, there was nothing else. Had complete cross-party support, but sadly, perhaps because it was in the time of Brexit, it ran out of parliamentary time. And that's Fabian with the beard and my husband and me in the middle. But however, Fabian has never stopped campaigning for us, and every time he's raised it in Parliament, and he's done it about 3 times since, we have made progress. The police put the case to the Crown Prosecution Service, who came back after about 8 months to say they couldn't prosecute because of lack of evidence. There's no video recordings of the wedding, there's no audio recordings kept at marriage. It is forced marriage, as I said, if you marry someone knowing that they lack mental capacity to marry. Marriage requires a much lower level of capacity than is needed to make a will anyway. But there is no evidence kept at marriage. And they said, we can't prosecute because what if she made a miracle recovery on the day of the notification of marriage, the miracle recovery on the day of the wedding? And they said, well, we know she didn't, but we can't prove it. And I just think that is ridiculous. The police got involved, of course, and they interviewed the registrars. And the registrars wrote a letter to try to show that Mum did have capacity, and it shows the exact opposite. The registrars said that the man had told them before the wedding, and this was earlier in the letter, which I'm going to show you a bit of. They said, my mum was very old, true, was very deaf, true. He had said she was terminally ill, true. He'd said she'd had a stroke, true. He said she was very forgetful, true. He probably also said, because we know he said it to everyone, and the family don't care about her and they never see her, which is a complete lie. He probably said that. I don't know he did, but anyway, whatever he said, he didn't mention my mother's 5-year history of diagnosed vascular dementia. But what he did say was enough to make them think, oh, well, she's a sweet old lady and they love each other and we'll wave this wedding through. And this is what they wrote next. I proceeded to ask Mrs. Blass for the same information. The questions that proved problematic were her age and her house number. Those should have been red flags for starters. As you remember, she didn't know her age at her 90th birthday party nearly 2 years earlier. All other details were given easily. She reminded me jokingly that a lady never gives her age, and that is the absolute masking technique of dementia. My mother had been highly intelligent and learnt really early on that if you go, oh, you can't expect me to give that answer, most people never ask you another question. But the registrar, trying to do her job, I replied by saying that on this occasion she had to. However, by recalling how many years separated herself and her brother, she eventually answered to my satisfaction. No idea what that means. She may be dragged up from her long-term memory the fact that she and her brother were 7 years apart. In respect of her address, she was able to name the street, but couldn't remember the number of her house. And I think that's because for many years she had lived on Lidget Lane and now lived on Lidget Avenue. I don't know this. I suspect she said Lidget. At this point, the man started to intervene. Well, he shouldn't have been able to intervene because he shouldn't have been in the same room, but there he is. And he was reminded that Mrs. Blass had to answer by herself. Again, there's the registrar trying to do her job. But sadly, this is where it all went horribly wrong. In view of her memory problem mentioned above, I decided that the street name only would be acceptable. Where did the registrars get the idea it was a memory problem from? From the man. So the only person they were listening to was the predator. There's no connection at all with medical records at marriage, nor do I think there should be. But what we're asking for is a set of robust questions with the idea that if you get one wrong, that marriage has to be referred for a capacity assessment. My mum didn't know the man's name. If they'd have said, what is the name of the man standing next to her, she'd have gone, ooh, and been very, very confused and probably got very upset. Even so, the other registrar was still not happy. When the couple left the room after this initial interview, the Deputy Superintendent Registrar asked me if I thought Mrs. Blass was fully aware of why she was there and should we proceed with the ceremony. At that point, according to their rules in their handbook, they should have stopped it, but they didn't. I replied that in my opinion, based on the interview, how her information had been given and her demeanour, you should go ahead. Her demeanour is she was smiling and therefore they assumed she understood. The first change we managed to get made in the registrar's handbook, which is there online, it's called a Guide for Authorised Persons, was to put you should not use demeanour as a guide to mental capacity. The Crown Prosecution Service kept the case for 8 months and then sent a policeman round to our house with the verdict. And I think it's because they sent this poor policeman because they knew how upset I would be. And I sobbed and sobbed. They couldn't prosecute, and that was my last chance of justice gone. And this is what the solicitor who looked at the evidence wrote. And I've just shown you the evidence from the registrars. Please bear that in mind when you have a look at this. This was the paragraph that broke me. The evidence given by the registrars simply does not support a situation where a person, the registrar, would sense any concern that both parties were not in agreement to the marriage. They identified with a lucid, happy and content woman, thus suggesting awareness of the situation and the surrounding matters, thereby giving full and free consent. To imply she did not do so is not enough to prove the case for forced marriage. That paragraph was either written by a solicitor who knew nothing about dementia, or it was a cover-up. I've never known to this day which it was, but it just broke my heart, and it still does whenever I read it. So what did the man who married my mother do? He insisted that my mother should be buried when she'd always wanted to be cremated. As I said, he didn't tell us when the funeral was, so we couldn't go. He kept all the money and all the possessions and refused to leave the house. So eventually we had to sell the old family home and move away. After a while, we moved to Skipton in Yorkshire first, but then my son and his wife were living in Newcastle, said, why don't we all buy a house together in Newcastle for a fresh start? And that's what we did. And so we now live with my son and his wife and their 4-year-old daughter, who is a delight, and my next granddaughter, who is 1 week, which is lovely. And it's partly helped, but honestly, I'm still haunted by the nightmare. And every night I still dream, well, not every night, probably every other night, that I'm back in the house, but something's terribly wrong. So he kept all the money and possessions and refused to leave the house. Finally, he used my mum's blue badge to park and was caught and prosecuted and failed to pay the fine. This was 6 months after her death. We found out by some court officials coming to the house looking for him. And when I said yes, they said, do you know who that man is? And I said, oh boy, yes, we do. Why? And then they told us the whole story, which they probably shouldn't have done, but they did. They probably used a blue badge millions of times. And the last time I spoke to him, and I won't speak to him again, he was by the garden gate doing something with the gate, and my head was saying, Daphne, don't go near him, but my little legs were taking me towards him. And I said, you know what, if my mother knew you'd been using her disabled badge after her death, she would have been horrified. She would have had the utmost contempt for you. And he didn't speak, he just ran away into the house. In 2018, we got a phone call, and our MP got the same phone call saying, that man that you're calling Ramlin on your website, because that's what I call him, it's not his name, is his real name? And they gave his real name. And I said, yes, why? And he said, well, in that case, he's just married my grandma. I'm not happy about it. And the grandma lived about a quarter of a mile from my mum's house, very, very near. And in fact, that brought back to me the fact that the first thing mum ever said to me about him is, there are a few old ladies he visits. He lived with that lady and married her because she knew from the conversation with me that marriage revokes a will. She made a new will excluding him from her estate. But then in July this year, I got a phone call from the family, from the daughter of the lady he married, saying, Daphne, can you help us? He's being incredibly coercive. He's trying to get her to change her will. She was dying at that point. He told her not to go into a hospice. They just want you to die there. And he tried desperately to get her to change her will. She never did. And the family are all now moving away and worried that he will try and challenge the will. So at least she didn't lose everything, but it was still the stress for the family had been horrendous. And they, like me, are completely convinced that he'll be now looking out for his next victim. The predators tend to be charming, plausible, manipulative, scary when crossed or challenged. And this combination is very difficult to deal with. The police found him very hard. They kept saying to me, Daphne, he's really odd. He's really odd. And I was kind of, yes, I know he's really odd. What is needed is procedures to deal with him. When the policeman went to the house to question him, the policeman came over to our house afterwards saying, he told me where to sit. He told me I wasn't going to have coffee because it was afternoon. He made me a cup of tea. He wouldn't let me talk to him until I'd drunk it. And finally, the policeman had been reduced to saying, I'm in charge, which was just bizarre. So what now? The Law Commission, in response to our campaign, had an open consultation into predatory marriage and whether marriage should continue to revoke a will. I have to say it wasn't just our campaign, because a lot of solicitors were believing that too now. But the Law Commission did say to me completely that the campaign had a lot to do with it, and I'm very proud of that. Marriage revoking a will dates from Section 18 of the 1837 Wills Act, 1837. So it's about time it was changed. They are proposing to abolish the 1837 Wills Act, so marriage will no longer revoke a will. And they've prepared a bill for Parliament. We're waiting to hear the government's response back to it. If you Google Law Commission wills, you'll find it. But but yeah, it's a very old piece of legislation. Many companies have changed it. But marriage doesn't revoke a will in France, in the Netherlands, in Scotland, in Canada, many countries. Changing this law would remove much of the incentive for predatory marriage, but because there's this big control element too, better safeguarding at marriage is needed, plus joined up safeguarding between different organisations to address coercive control. So it would have been great, for example, if the GP had got straight onto social services and said, we're really worried about this threat, but they just didn't see the threat. I started campaigning almost immediately. And now I've given, well, it says nearly 300, it's well over 300 now, talks on hereditary marriage to solicitors, registrars, police, NHS, social workers, safeguarding professionals, anybody who will listen, basically. I've got another talk this evening to a load of GPs. And this is me at the United Nations in Geneva last autumn. I was so proud to be asked to do that talk, and that was for Widows' Rights International. I'm also very proud that this year I've been awarded a Churchill Fellowship, which is charity set up in the memory of Winston Churchill, and it'll fund me to travel to Canada, the Netherlands and France to research marriage procedures in those countries with the aim of using this knowledge to make positive change in the UK. I've done the trip to Canada. I got back from Toronto fairly recently, had a wonderful time, met some fascinating people, and I learned that they have changed the law in most provinces, so marriage no longer revokes a will. But there is even less safeguarding than there is here at civil marriage in Canada, which is absolutely shocking. So I'm hoping to go to the Netherlands and France in the new year. One interesting and very ironic point, when I've done the Churchill Fellowship, I become a Churchill Fellow and I can then put the letters CF after my name. I don't know when I would do that, but I can. And ironically, CF are the initials of our predator, which I just think is hilarious. I'm going to show you my last two slides now. Here's my mother's grave. It's a patch of grass in the middle with no headstone. We had to track it down via Leeds Parks and Cemeteries. He hasn't put up a headstone because he's moved on. He married somebody else. We can't put up a headstone because he owns the grave plot. So to me, that patch of grass is an absolute monument to the injustice here. And my most surreal moment, I think, was wandering round that cemetery with Angela Rippon, filming for Rip Off Britain. Leeds Parks and Cemeteries said, you can't film in a Leeds cemetery with BBC cameras. It's not allowed. And Angela Rippon, who was so sympathetic, bless her, she held up a mobile phone and she said, oh, look, I seem to have this mobile phone. It appears to have a camera on it. We could film using that. And that's what they did. And that's what they showed on the programme. Absolutely bizarre. But she was very, very sympathetic because her mother had dementia. Here is my last slide. I showed you Mum making a sandcastle earlier on in the presentation. And this is what she wrote underneath it. Joan was here, and I'm not going to let her be forgotten. Thank you so much for listening. That's my very non-exhaustive list of thanks to all the various people who've been working with us. And we now have a really good team of people helping us, which is brilliant. So I'm continuing to give talks. Just yesterday, I was asked if I would give a talk in Chicago next April. So I'm really looking forward to that because this is a global problem, I now realise. Thank you all so much for coming and for listening. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you have. I'll hand over back to Marcia now.
Wow. Thank you so very much, Daphne, for sharing your story. And I'm so sorry that you've been through this. The work that you've done is amazing. The changes that you've started to make, that you've made, have been amazing. And I'm sure everybody who's been listening feels the same way. Thank you for sharing your email address in the chat. Can I
and
ask
this is our website as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can I ask if anybody does have any questions that they put them in the chat or in the Q&A section, please? We have got some time to ask questions. I think
Sometimes, yes,
I
sorry,
was going to
Marcia.
say, Daphne, I think for me, one of the things that I was really interested in, it was about the lasting power of attorney.
Yeah,
And I think that for me, there's a false sort of security that
yeah,
you have
absolutely.
with thinking that you've got that. Um,
Yeah.
can you tell us more about that at all?
Yes, I have spoken to a couple of solicitors who said they could solve that if they wanted to. They couldn't do it retrospectively, but they could do it by saying when somebody's giving power of attorney to their son or to their daughter, they could be asked, if you were planning to marry again, would you be happy for your son or daughter to be told? At which point you could say yes or no. My mum would have said, "Oh, don't be silly. I'm never going to marry again. That's ridiculous." So, but of course you can tell my daughter. That's what she'd have said. If they had the political will to bring that in, that would be really helpful. But to me, it's the huge problem at the moment is everyone assumes the power of attorney would mean you would be told. And I can't blame people for assuming
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's like many people assume that your will's your will and that nothing would destroy it, that marriage wouldn't do away with it. In fact, I spoke about a year ago to a conference of police in Tidworth. There were 500 of them, and 27 of them knew that marriage revokes a will. Only 27. And
right.
thankfully, the the Society of Trusts and Estate Practitioners, senior solicitors, have now realised people don't know, and they're trying to share that awareness. And thank you
Yes.
for all for your interests in the comments. And yeah, thank you, Alison, who said interesting, informative for me personally as well as professionally. Yeah, often when I give a talk, somebody says, "Oh, something like that happened in our family," or "It could happen," or "It might happen." So if any of you would like to get in touch with me afterwards, please do. One thing we could have done,
Yeah.
but nobody told us because they didn't see the threat, we could have put on a caveat in expectation of marriage. That's what it's called. You have to go down to your local register office and put on this caveat: it is free. It's not foolproof. The decision on the day is still down to the registrars, but it alerts the registrars to the fact that someone's concerned about the wedding. Apparently, when King Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles, 30 people put on caveats. Of course, there was no real reason for that not to go ahead,
Yeah.
but it does alert the registrars, and I've found registrars really know about it. Solicitors don't always, and if they do, they've no idea how you do it. But what you do is you go down to your local register office. Whether it would apply to all register offices, I don't know, because register offices are only just beginning to be joined up by a thing called a computer. They never
Uh,
were before. So again,
okay.
I sound maybe bitter about it. It's not that I blame the registrars. I want to say that as very loudly and clearly as I can. It's not their fault, but really the people in charge
Yeah.
should be trying to bring it into the 21st century. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you for all the comments in the chat.
that's great. I wonder whether there should be more training for registrars. So I know that local authorities provide safeguarding training, and I wonder if it ought to
Yeah.
be mandatory that registrars attend safeguarding adults training as well.
It, it
So
should be absolutely mandatory because at the
yeah,
moment the forced marriage unit who are part of the police have started rolling out training to registrars, which is great. They sent me the materials and I said, your materials are great, but they need more examples because
yeah,
examples are what kind of bring it to life, really. But at least they're doing it, and they're doing it for police, registrars, and social workers. And it's done through Eventbrite, though it's free. They can all go to it. They're proving the registrar's one is proving very, very popular. They send me every invite, and it's often sold out. Not that it costs anything, but they fill up very quickly because the more astute registrars realise they really need this training.
yeah,
But the registrars who don't think they need training, and that clearly applies to, I'm afraid that does apply to the ones in Leeds. Some of them anyway, not all of them, but a few of them. They can just not go to the training, so it needs to be mandatory.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
the local authorities should integrate registrars. Thank you, Dion. That's absolutely true.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I can this training session, you can share it wherever you like. And, you know, I hope I make it perfectly clear that if the registrars would like to see it, that's absolutely fine. I've done a lot of talks to registrars. In fact, I spoke at the Scottish Association of Registrars AGM, and they were all very interested to hear it. And it's interesting, marriage doesn't revoke a will in Scotland, but that it's still going on because of the control thing. So
yeah, yeah,
I see Josephine has said, if you have to give one or two more important tips or takeaways, what would they be? My big takeaways, first of all, marriage revokes a will, and to know that. And the other thing is the predators are incredibly convincing, much more convincing than families. The families often sound slightly hysterical, which is why I always try and sound fairly calm. But the
mhm,
predators are very, oh, you see, Daphne, she never goes near her mum. I know she lives next door, but she never sees her. You can see how believable that is. It's so infuriating. And of course, there's a lot of problems with power of attorney at the moment, and a lot of that is predatory sons and daughters just taking their parents' money. So, and I suppose my big tip to professionals is ask one more question than you're comfortable with. Because if you do that and the person is a predator, you will quickly see they get very cross very quickly, or they
yeah.
swerve it, you know. So
It's that
it's that's that. Thank you.
the professional curiosity, isn't it?
Professional curiosity, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for who's put this? Somebody's put it's Karen. It's frustrating from a safeguarding perspective. The law is outdated. Registrars need further training. We had a case recently, similar concerns, and I had to push it to postpone a wedding while we did mental capacity act. Well done on challenging the legal framework. The problem is, registrars have said to me, often they're the only people in the building on a Saturday morning, apart from the wedding party. They've got a big, scary wedding party in front of them. If they try to stop a wedding, they've been threatened with everything from physical violence to being sued for the cost of the honeymoon. It's really difficult. And they're not taught in what to say. I've spent my career teaching medical students, for example, what do you say to break bad news? And we would like a set form of words to stop a wedding. What do you say? Um, and
True, true.
so yes, it's that registrars do need more training. Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, so thank you very much. I tell you what I will do now. I'll put the poll in that asks what one action will you take away as a result of this webinar. So it could be
Thank
what one
you.
action or what piece of information have you taken away, or what's been your knowledge or growth as a result of this.
Thank you. It'll be interesting to hear.
Yeah, let's see what people are saying. Professional curiosity, question more. I'll question, and then it says colleagues. Sometimes when these word clouds come up, different words come up separately. So I think someone's saying it overrides LPAs, more
Yes.
awareness, lots of professional curiosity. So
Point
yeah,
is, you can't do anything about it very easily or at all once somebody has died. And this is why the predators keep it secret. You
yeah,
cannot annul a marriage when one party has died unless it was bigamous or incestuous. Fraudulent doesn't count, but you can't prove it was fraudulent because there's no evidence kept at marriage. And this is what solicitors have started calling the predatory marriage trap.
right.
Yeah.
So it feels like your talk gave everybody lots of information. We haven't got any further questions, but like you said, you've put the website in the chat. You've put your email address in the chat. If anybody does want to get hold of Daphne, I know there are some managers here in the webinar as well, so they may want to get hold of you in terms of any additional or further training that you might be able to support them with.
If anyone would like me to give a talk to your organisation, do please get in touch, because I'm doing these at the rate of 2 or 3 a week now. So please do get in touch with me.
And I'm really grateful and thankful of your time, your knowledge, and the work that you're putting into advocating against predatory marriage, Daphne. Thank you for sharing your story with us all.
Thank you so much. I thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And yeah, if you would like to help, please share the story. Watch people's mouths fall open. Please share the story, because the initial reaction from everyone in the beginning was, no, that can't have happened. And the first reaction from the register office was, in the registrar's professional opinion, she was fit to marry. And I wrote straight back and said, they don't have a professional opinion. It's not a profession. And that's not their fault. There's nothing wrong with a job. But if it's going to be a profession, even more, train them more, but don't just lie and say it's a profession. So there you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I really appreciate everyone's comments.
Thank you. I will just launch the last poll that's asking about whether you feel that you've increased your knowledge and your confidence in the subject matter. I mean, maybe it's given us more things to think about as well, that what we can do. But we can see that people's confidence has increased.
Great.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So my knowledge really has increased, I have to say. So, but thank you, Daphne. I'll share the feedback with you following.
Thank you so much.
The webinar will be available on the Safeguarding Adults website, probably from next week, by the time that I've got round to editing everything. And like I said at the beginning, if there's any other sessions that anybody wants to participate in, you can still register as well. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you for all your comments. Daphne will be able to see your comments even after the session has ended. So please feel free to carry on putting the comments in the chat section. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye-bye.
Daphne, you can stay on.
Thank you.